Section 4. You will hear a talk on how the North Bank Business Centre helps local people develop their businesses. First, you will have some time to look at questions 31 to 35. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 35.
The subject of this evening's talk at the North Bank Business Centre is local businesses in the area surrounding the university and the benefit they bring to the employment prospects of people in the local area, especially young people at the beginning of their career. We established the centre in response to approaches from several business people in the area who had wanted to start up new businesses but who had not managed to find any help locally and did not know where to turn. Moreover, they had all, without exception, come up against enormous bureaucratic obstacles. We therefore invited them in as a group to meet the members of the department and the students. Stemming from that is the centre, which now focuses mainly, but not exclusively, on business startups. Just after the centre was set up, snapshot research conducted by the department over the telephone gave some startling results. The information about local businesses revealed that 3 out of every 10 local businesses startups that we could collect information on had failed within the first 6 months, and another 5 had gone within the year, leaving only 2. The most common reasons given for the businesses closing were, first, high rents, which are 33% higher than the national average due to the area being very central. Second, lack of knowledge about grants, basically because of ignorance about how to access them. And thirdly, a lack of business support, because they did not know where to obtain advice from. Since the centre came into existence 3 years ago, we have helped to change this climate of failure. The current statistics show a remarkable turnaround in the fortunes of local businesses. And now, after a year, only 2 businesses close out of every 10, compared to 8 before the centre was set up.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you will have some time to look at questions 36 to 40. Now listen and answer questions 36 to 40.
6 local businesses are now taking part in a work placement and monitoring scheme, which is of mutual benefit to ourselves and the companies involved. O Foods, a small startup company with 9 employees involved in organic food and based at a local market, has 1 final year graduate doing a year-long study on improving the stock turnaround. This was a particular problem because the company found that they were losing sometimes up to 30% of their stock. Another startup is Innovations, which deals with producing video games. This company, which employs only 5 people, all under the age of 25, is receiving support in attracting business partners and achieving production targets. In the smaller business category, Samsons Limited, a courier company which is interested in developing a taxi service, is being offered help with their business expansion plans. Another small niche company called Vintage Scooter, which specializes in revamping old scooters, is taking part in a product monitoring scheme offering customer service up to a year after purchase to check the quality of their restoration. The first of the two medium-sized companies that the scheme is monitoring is Build Limited, which employs 47 people. A comparison of their products and services with other businesses in the area is being carried out by a researcher who is trying to support them in their efforts to extend the company's product range. The last company, Jones Systems, is perhaps the most interesting because it has been the victim of considerable personnel problems which have been affecting the day-to-day operations of the company, and so we are looking at conflict management and team building within the company. To sum up, advisors help the companies look at different business options and models, apply for grants, deal with employment issues, systems creation, and also provide accommodation at the centre to help them start up. E-mentoring for fledgling businesses is also in operation for those who find it difficult to attend the centre personally. The programme is funded by grants from local authorities.
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Section 4. You will hear a lecture on St. Lawrence Island. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40. Today, I'm going to give you some information on the little-known atoll, St. Lawrence Island, which is situated west of mainland Alaska in the Bering Sea. Although it is not politically classified as belonging to Alaska and therefore the USA, St. Lawrence Island is geographically closer to Russia than it is to the Alaskan mainland. It is in fact situated just under 70 kilometers from Siberia and over 160 kilometers from Alaska. It is thought to be one of the last remaining portions of landmass above sea level that once joined Asia with the North American continent. To the south of the island is a permanent polynya, which is an area of open water surrounded by sea ice. A polynya such as this is formed due to the action of winds and ocean currents which force frozen water away from the coastline. As new ice forms in the open water area, the wind and currents push the new ice downwind to the existing ice formation. The term polynya refers to the open area of unfrozen sea and not the ice itself. The island and its surrounding area is home to a high number of seabirds and marine animals. This is thought to be due to the influence of the Anadyr Current, which is an ocean current that brings cold but nutrient-rich water from the deep waters of the Bering Sea. There are many lakes and small streams, though no trees growing on St. Lawrence Island, and the only woody plant species in existence there is the Arctic willow, which grows no taller than 30 centimetres in height. Although the central part of the island is mountainous, the majority of the landscape is flat tundra, many parts of this turning into swampy land in summer, which is difficult to cross. St. Lawrence Island is thought to have been first occupied around 2,500 years ago. This settlement has been dated due to archaeological investigation of the area and the findings of Okvik, early Eskimo, artefacts and statues. It is thought, however, that early occupation of the island was never permanent and that in fact populations would leave and return as governed by the availability of resources and food and seasonal weather patterns. The island is the first area of Alaska known to have been visited by European explorers, the first of whom was Vitus Bering, who was of Russian and Danish descent. He first visited the island on St. Lawrence's Day, August 10th, 1728, hence its name. Prior to Bering's visit, the island was known as Sivukak by the Yupik people, who are native people of the central Alaskan region. In the mid-1800s, there were around 4,000 Yupik people living in several villages on St. Lawrence Island. These days, there are around 1,200 people living there. The significant drop in population size occurred between 1878 and 1880, when extreme famine hit the island, causing many to die of starvation and forcing many others to leave and relocate to different parts of Alaska. It is mainly Yupik people who live there still, and their main pursuits are hunting, fishing, and reindeer herding. In 1900, reindeer were introduced to the island with the intention of developing larger-scale farming to enhance the island's economy. By 1917, there were 10,000 of the animals on St. Lawrence, but numbers today are significantly reduced. Reindeers are now as a source of sustenance meat to sustain the island's population and are not farmed for commercial or export purposes. The island's people are also renowned for their carving expertise, most of their carvings and statues being made from walrus ivory and whalebone. Today, only two significant villages still exist on the island, which are Gambell and Savunga. From 1952 to 1972, a multifunctional U.S. Air Force station was operated from the northeast cape of St. Lawrence Island. After its closure in the 1970s, it was observed that a seemingly large proportion of local families began to experience health problems. Some experts believe that these illnesses were linked to high levels of chemical contamination from the site, the effects of pollutants being intensified by the cold Arctic air. Whilst links have not been confirmed, in 2003, the majority of the facility was completely removed in a cleanup project. The site continues to be monitored, as do unusual incidences of ill health in the local population. That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Section 4. You will hear a lecture on the history of Melbourne's water supply. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
As we all know, Australia is one of the driest continents in the world. So in the last few sessions, we've been looking at various aspects of the water resource of Australia. And this morning, we're focusing on the history of Melbourne's water supply. The area surrounding the Yarra River and Port Phillip Bay, that is now Melbourne, was originally inhabited by the Wurundjeri people, you may probably know. And these Indigenous Australians had no need for complicated water supply systems. Instead, they relied on local rivers and creeks or dug shallow wells to tap supplies of underground water. The first European settlers who arrived in Melbourne in 1803 also drew water from local creeks. However, as their settlements grew, demand for a reliable water supply system began to grow. In 1803, the first attempt at settlement of the Port Phillip region was on the Mornington Peninsula, when Colonel David Collins established a camp at Sullivan's Bay. The only source of water for almost 400 convicts, Marines, and free settlers was 6 wooden barrels sunk in the sand to tap groundwater. Although settlement of the Port Phillip region had gradually grown after Collins arrived, it was not until 1835 that John Batman officially claimed the establishment of Melbourne. 5 years after its official beginning, Melbourne's population had already reached 7,000. Water pumps were installed on the northern bank of the Yarra River. Men with water carts sold water door to door for 3 shillings a barrel, equal to about 30 cents for 550 litres. Due to the Victorian gold rush of the 1850s, Melbourne's population rapidly increased and Melbourne was transformed into a major city. At the same time, many new industries and buildings were being developed. These factors all meant that systems needed to be created to supply water to Melbourne. And in 1857, Yan Yean Reservoir, Melbourne's first water supply reservoir, was completed and began to supply water to Melbourne, which by now had a population of 100,000. In 1891, the Melbourne and Metropolitan Board of Works, MMBW, was formed and became responsible for Melbourne's water supply. Melbourne had grown to a city of 500,000 people. To provide water to this rapidly growing city, especially the eastern suburbs, the Watts River, near Halesville, was tapped. It supplied water to Melbourne via the Maroondah Aqueduct. Time takes us to the 20th century. By 1910, there are 123,227 connections to Melbourne's water supply system, and in the 1920s, in response to growing complaints about water quality and lack of water pressure in Melbourne's eastern suburbs, a large-scale dam construction program began. Maroondah Reservoir, about 55 kilometres northeast of Melbourne, was completed in 1927. The completion of Maroondah Reservoir, O'Shanassy Reservoir in 1928 and Sylvan Reservoir in 1932 saw Melbourne's storages boosted from a capacity of 30,000 million litres to 104,500 million litres. A very dry summer in 1937-1938 resulted in water restrictions being imposed in Melbourne. The Melbourne and Metropolitan Board of Works also started planning for the building of a new dam to expand Melbourne's water supplies in 1940. After the Second World War, the population in Melbourne increased sharply in 1950s, which meant that new water supply requirement occurred. The Upper Yarra Reservoir was completed, tripling Melbourne's total water storage to nearly 300,000 million litres. In the 1960s, many parts of the water supply system in Melbourne were replaced, and following the severe drought of 1967-1968, the building of Cardinia Reservoir commenced. Work also commenced on diverting part of the flow of the Thomson River in Gippsland into the Upper Yarra River catchment. To meet growing demand in the western suburbs, particularly during summer, a reservoir with a capacity of 27,000 million litres was completed at Greenville in 1970. Now, before I move on to the 1980s, I'd like to say something about...
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Section 4. You will hear a lecture about British educational system. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Many people think that school is just about teaching children what are often called the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. In other words, the purpose of school is to provide children with literacy and the other basic skills they will need to become active members of society. However, the purpose of the British educational system is to also socialise children. Children are taught practical skills, but in school they also learn the rules and values they need to become good citizens, to participate in the community and social life, and to contribute to the economic prosperity of an advanced industrial economy. Great Britain is a society in which social class is still very important. In Britain, the accent you speak with, the clothes you wear, and the colleges you attend are all markers that identify your social class. The college tie is an important marker of social class. Even on informal occasions, you will sometimes see men wearing their school ties as belts to hold up their trousers, proudly displaying their attendance at a certain school. The 2 oldest universities in Britain are Oxford and Cambridge. These 2 rival universities have been nicknamed Oxbridge, which is still the single best way to guarantee a successful career. According to records, 46% of Conservative Party members of Parliament were graduates of Oxbridge, as were 3/4 of the government executive. Most senior civil servants are also Oxbridge graduates. When people in Britain talk about the Old Boys Network, they mean this elite group of men who went to school and university together. The British education system is run by the state, which provides funding, oversees standards, and tries to make sure that all British children receive a quality education. One of the largest, most important government departments is the Ministry of Education. In 1944, the Education Act made entry to secondary schools and universities meritocratic. All children were given the right to a free secondary education, not because they were of a certain social class or because their parents possessed a certain amount of money. In the 1960s, comprehensive schools were introduced all over the country, which ended the division between grammar schools, where the most academically capable students were sent to be prepared for university, and vocational schools, where less successful students were sent to learn the trade. Entrance exams were abolished, and schools were no longer allowed to let students compete for places. In 1976, British education was the focus of a new controversy when the Labour Party started the Great Education Debate about national standards and styles of teaching. However, the government thought that job training was also very important. It felt that schools were not paying enough attention to teaching students the traditional 3 R's. Therefore, in 1989, the Ministry of Education introduced a national curriculum. Nowadays, all children throughout the country must study English, mathematics, science, religious education, history, geography, technology, music, art, physical education, and a modern foreign language, etc. Now in Britain, children are legally obliged to attend school from the age of 5 or 4 in Northern Ireland to 16. Parents can choose between sending their children to state schools or to private schools. State schools are funded by local and central government. About 93% of pupils receive free education from the public sector. In the private sector, there are independent schools, which are commonly, but confusingly, called public schools. Independent schools receive their funding through the private sector and through tuition rates, with some government assistance. Up to the age of 5, children may have some pre-primary schooling in nursery schools, daycare, or playgroups. Between the ages of 5 to 11, pupils mainly attend sector state primary schools. From the age of 11 up to around the age of 18, students attend secondary schools. About 90% of secondary schools are comprehensive schools, which admit children without reference to their academic abilities. After 5 years of secondary education, English, Northern Irish, and Welsh students sit their GCSE exam, or General Certificate of Secondary Education. Based on these results, pupils can decide whether to quit school or to prepare to sit exams for university entrance. The General Certificate of Education, Advanced, is usually called the A-Levels exam. This is for students who want to pursue further education at university. Pupils have to try to get 3 or 4 A-levels in the subjects they are most proficient at. Other pupils who decide not to go to university may choose to take vocational training, which provide a broadly based preparation for future work. The Open University in Britain offers a non-traditional route for people to take university-level courses and receive a university degree. There is no formal entry requirement, such as qualifications when students register. Students follow university courses through textbooks, TV and radio broadcasts, video, and even the internet. First degree courses are mainly full-time and last 3 years, except in Scotland where they take 4 years. Degree titles vary, but usually one award is a Bachelor of Arts, or BA, or a Bachelor of Science, a BSc. For a second degree Master of Arts, MA, or Science, MSc, and Doctor of Philosophy, PhD. While in Cambridge and Oxford, the BA converts to an MA several years later upon paying a fee.
This is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Section 4. You will hear a lecture about climate. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good afternoon. I'm Stefan Ramatov, a professor of physics of the oceans at Potsdam University. Today I'd like to talk about the extreme weather events in recent years. During the last 10 years, a number of stunning extreme weather events have taken place. In 2003, the most severe heat wave, which broke previous temperature records and caused 70,000 deaths in Europe. 2 years later, the most severe hurricane season ever witnessed in the Atlantic destroyed New Orleans and broke records in terms of the number and intensity of storms. In 2007, unprecedented wildfires raged across Greece, nearly devastating the ancient site of Olympia. In the Arctic, the Northwest Passage became ice-free for the first time in our living memory. After record-breaking drought and heat, in 2009, over 100 people were killed in bushfires in Australia. There are lots of extreme weather events in 2010. For example, that summer, central Russia had been in the grips of its worst ever heat wave, which had caused nearly thousands of deaths. Owing to drought and heat, more than 500 wildfires had raged out of control, smothering Moscow in smoke and threatening several nuclear facilities. Another result of this heat wave was the soaring grain prices, since the Russian government had banned wheat exports. In 2010, flooding had seemed to become a main actor in the world. In China, flash floods had killed more than 1,000 people and destroyed more than 1 million buildings. Meanwhile, Pakistan was struggling with unprecedented flooding, which had killed more than 1,000 people and affected millions more. On a smaller scale, the European countries such as Germany, Poland, and the Czech Republic have also suffered serious flooding. At the same time, global temperatures in recent years have been at their highest levels in records that go back 130 years. Sea ice cover in the Arctic got to its lowest point of a recorded average level for the month of June ever. 2 huge chunks of ice broke off in July and August in Greenland. Are these events connected? Does this have anything to do with global warming? And are human activities to blame? Although we cannot scientifically prove or disprove that global warming caused any particularly extreme events, we can say that global warming very likely makes many kinds of extreme weather both more frequent and more severe. All weather is driven by energy, and the sun ultimately supplies this energy. But the biggest change in the Earth's energy budget by far over the past 100 years is due to the accumulation in our atmosphere of greenhouse gases, which limit the exit of heat into space. As a result of fossil fuel emissions, there is now 1/3 more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than at any time in at least 1 million years, as the latest ice drilling in Antarctica has revealed. The changes in the Earth energy budget caused by solar variations are at least 10 times smaller in comparison. And these changes go in the wrong direction. In recent years, the sun has been at its most dimmest, according to satellite measurements since the 1970s. Therefore, when unprecedented extreme weather events occur, the prime suspect is naturally the biggest atmospheric change that has happened over the past 100 years, one that has been caused by human emission. It is not difficult to understand the fact that heat waves, like the one in Russia, become more frequent and extreme in a warmer world. Extreme rainfall events will also become more frequent and intense in a warmer climate. According to a simple fact of physics, as usual, warm air can hold more moisture. For each degree in Celsius of warming, 7% more water is available to rain down from saturated air masses. And the warming climate can also be a factor of drought risk. even where rainfall does not fall, but increased evaporation rate dries out the soils. One pattern can change atmospheric circulation is the carbon dioxide effect, which can cause more extremes of heat, drought, or rainfall in some regions, while reducing them in others. The problem is that a decrease in those extremes to which humans are already well adapted supplies only modest advantages, whereas the new extremes to which we are not adapted can be devastating, as extreme events in recent years show. The extreme events in this summer indicate how vulnerable our societies are to weather-related extremes. These conditions of global warming occur after 0.8 degrees Celsius of change. With swift and efficient decisive action, we can still limit global warming to a total of 2 degrees Celsius or a bit less. But even that much warming would need a lot of effort to adapt to weather extremes and even rising sea levels. With weak action and results, like those promised by governments at the Copenhagen Conference in 2009, we will be on a course to a 3 to 4 Celsius degree change in global warming. Many societies and ecosystems do not adapt to the warming. If we do nothing, the Earth could even heat up by between 5 to 7 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, and more thereafter. We have to face the facts. Our emissions of greenhouse gases probably are at least mainly to blame for this summer of extremes. We do really hope that extreme weather events in the summer are a last-minute wake-up call to policymakers, the corporate world, and all citizens.
This is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.